Ever heard that saying, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst? Well, Sun Tzu was already on that wavelength ages ago. He said, it is a doctrine of war not to assume the enemy will not come, but rather to rely on one's readiness to meet him. And that's a perfect lead-in to ADP 337, Chapter 1. We're going deep on protection in today's Army, especially for those of you serving right now who want to really get a handle on these core concepts.
And it matters now more than ever, given that we operate in a world with, peer threats.
Peer threat, it sounds very official, but what's that actually look like on the ground? For you, it means we're not facing like outdated forces anymore. It's adversaries with technology that's just as advanced as ours, sometimes even more so.
Right, they can launch these sophisticated cyber attacks that can take down entire communication networks, hit us with long-range missiles, or even blend in with the civilian population. Makes them really hard to target.
Yeah, it makes them hard to even identify in the first place. So that's why this whole document really signals a shift in how we need to think. It's moving away from that old frontline versus rear idea.
Because with these peer and near-peer threats, everyone's a potential target. Every soldier needs to be thinking proactively about protection.
And that's where I think this deep dive is going to get really interesting, because ADP 337 isn't about just dodging bullets or building walls. It's about safeguarding your unit's ability to fight, to move, no matter what the situation.
It is. The document actually changes how it defines protection. It goes beyond just the very basic ideas of defense. It's about proactively protecting your combat power and your freedom to act, which are essential in today's really complex operational environments.
Let's break that down. The document talks about two main types of protection: active and passive. Active protection, you can think of it like intercepting an enemy attack before it even gets to you.
Yeah, like using radar to detect incoming missiles and shoot them down, or having a patrol that spots and neutralizes an ambush before it can be,
Sprung.
sprung. Exactly.
Yeah. And then you've got passive protection, which is more about making yourself a harder target.
Right, even if they do get through.
Even if they penetrate those initial defenses.
Right, think body armor, fortified bunkers, even camouflage that makes it harder for the enemy to see you in the first place.
But here's the thing, both active and passive protection, they both require you to think ahead, to be proactive. You can't just react when something happens, right? You have to be anticipating those threats, understanding your enemy, figuring out where you might be vulnerable.
And that's where understanding the operational environment and, really getting it is absolutely key.
This is where ADP 337 goes beyond just like terrain and stuff, right?
Right.
We're talking about 8 interconnected variables, all of which make up the modern battle space: political, military, economic, social, information, infrastructure, physical environment, and time.
Yeah, it's a mouthful, I know.
It's a lot.
But the thing is, they are all connected. Think about it. Political climates will directly impact where and when we deploy. Social media is a weapon now. It can be used to shape opinions, even influence how we're perceived by the local people wherever we are. Economic instability can create openings for extremist groups to gain a foothold.
And then there's that information piece, which almost feels like it's its own battlefield these days.
It really is. Adversaries use open source intelligence, which is just a fancy way of saying they use publicly available information. So things you might find on social media, even Google Maps, to collect information on troop movements. They could even potentially identify key infrastructure, maybe even target individuals.
It's like, imagine you're deployed and you're trying to share a photo with your family back home, which seems harmless, right? But if you're not careful with those privacy settings, that picture could give away your unit's location.
Oh, absolutely.
And that could put you and your fellow soldiers at risk.
Because it's not just about protecting yourself, right? It's your unit, it's the equipment, it's the entire mission.
It's the bigger picture. Okay, so we understand the environment a little bit better, but what about the threats themselves? ADP 337, it categorizes them into 3 different levels. Understanding those levels, that's really important for determining how you approach protection.
You remember that attack on the dining hall at FOB Mares back in 2004?
Yeah?
Tragically, that was classified as a level I attack, which at the time they thought it would have a negligible impact on the overall mission.
Right, and yet so many lives were lost.
Yeah.
It really shows you that even what you might call a low-level attack can have these really serious consequences.
Absolutely. And think about it today. A level I attack could be something like a cyber attack that messes up, a critical supply line or takes down a whole communication network. On the surface, it might not seem like a huge deal, but the ripple effect.
Yeah.
that could
Yeah.
put the entire mission at risk.
You're right. It's not just about the initial impact, but that kind of cascading effect it can have.
Exactly. So ADP 337, it really stresses that you need to understand not just the different levels of threat, but all the different ways those threats can actually show up.
Right. So we're not just talking about physical attacks anymore. There are cyber threats,
Mm.
information warfare, even something that seems kind of minor, like an OPSEC violation, that could potentially make things so much worse.
Because in this interconnected world, even a small opening, even a crack can be exploited and become a major vulnerability.
Which is why those 4 pillars of protection tasks that are outlined in ADP 337, those are really important. We've got risk management, protecting capabilities, protecting areas, and protecting information. And these aren't, just buzzwords. They're actually the foundation of how you build a comprehensive protection strategy.
And they all work together. You can't just pick and choose, focus on one and ignore the others. They all play a part.
They do. For example, let's say you're planning a route for a convoy. You would use those risk management principles to try to identify potential threats along that route.
Right, like IEDs, places where an ambush could happen.
Exactly.
Then you've got to think about protecting your capabilities. What are the essential vehicles, the equipment, what you absolutely need for that mission? And how are you going to make sure that those are all working? But not just working, how are you going to protect them in case of an attack, even a breakdown?
And then you've got to think about protecting the areas where you'll be operating. So that might mean you're coordinating with other units to set up security perimeters. Maybe you're setting up checkpoints, maybe even working with, local forces to gather intelligence.
And you can't forget about protecting information, which is huge. That means being really strict about OPSEC, protecting sensitive data, and just being aware of the fact that the enemy might be trying to gather intelligence on you, signals intelligence, that kind of thing.
It's like this big puzzle, and all those different pillars, those are like the pieces, and they have to fit together. Otherwise, you don't have that complete picture of protection.
And that's where those 5 core principles of protection come in from ADP 337. Comprehensive, integrated, layered, redundant, and enduring. Those are the things that hold it all together.
All right, so let's unpack those. What does it mean to have a comprehensive approach to protection? What are we talking about there?
Well, it means you're not thinking about security as just one thing. It's not just about physical barriers or cybersecurity. It's bigger than that. You've got to be looking at everything. What are all the potential threats? Physical, digital, even psychological, and then you develop your plan to address all of them.
It's like connecting all the dots, right? You
Yep.
got to see how all those different elements of protection, how do they work together? How do they affect each other?
You got it, and that's where integrated comes in, that principle. It means making sure all those different protection efforts from each individual soldier all the way up to, the top, they're all working together.
So it's like a well-oiled machine where each part is working in sync to achieve that bigger goal of protection.
That's a great way to put it. You've got your intelligence teams giving info to the planners who are then working with the units on the ground to coordinate those security measures. It's all about communication and making sure everyone's on the same page.
And then there's layered, which, if I'm understanding this right, it's kind of like creating overlapping defenses so that if one layer fails, there's another one right behind it, ready to go.
Think of it like body armor, the kind they have nowadays. You've got a layer that's for stopping bullets, one that protects against knives, and then maybe even another one that's there to protect against specific environmental things you might encounter. Each layer has a job to do, but they all work together to protect you.
So just having one type of security measure, that's not enough anymore.
Right.
You need these multiple layers, and each one is designed for a specific vulnerability.
Exactly. And that goes hand in hand with redundant. It's like having a backup, just in case.
Yeah, because in a perfect world, all those layers would hold. But we know that's not how it works. Warfare, it's unpredictable. So you need those backup communication channels, those alternate routes, those plans you can fall back on when things go sideways.
You've got to have that redundancy to keep the mission going, no matter what gets thrown your way.
Okay, so we've got comprehensive, integrated, layered, and redundant. That brings us to our 5th principle, enduring. So what does that mean when we're talking about protection?
It means having the stamina to keep those protection efforts going, over the long haul, even when you're low on resources, morale is down, or you're facing a challenge that seems impossible.
It's about making protection so ingrained, such a part of the culture, that it's just second nature. It's just what you do no matter how long you're out there, no matter how tough it gets.
Exactly. That unwavering commitment to protecting yourself, your buddies, your mission. day in and day out.
And that's even more important when you think about the kinds of places we're operating in nowadays, right?
Mm.
I mean, we're talking dense urban areas, huge populations constantly moving, critical infrastructure mixed in with, traditional military targets.
It's a whole different game than fighting in a more traditional, battlefield setting.
It is. It's not like you could just dig trenches and have this clear line that you're defending anymore. It's not like that. Everything's blurred. Those threats are always changing, and you have to be able to adapt really quickly.
And that's really what ADP 337 is trying to get across. It's not just about following a set of rules. It's about having this framework for how you think about protection, about making smart decisions when you're in a situation that's constantly changing and unpredictable.
Being proactive, thinking ahead of the enemy,
Yeah,
always trying to spot those vulnerabilities before they become a problem.
absolutely. And recognizing that the enemy is always looking for an opening, right? Maybe it's a cyber attack to disrupt our supply lines, or an information operation to make us look bad, or even just something as simple as, someone forgetting to secure a communication channel. They'll take what they can get.
Which goes back to what we were talking about before, about how in modern warfare, there isn't really a front line in the traditional sense.
Yeah.
Anyone and anything can be a target.
That's why everyone being in on protection is so important. It's not just on intelligence or security forces. Every single soldier has to be vigilant, aware of what's around them, and taking those steps to protect themselves, their unit.
It's about saying something if you see something that seems off, asking those tough questions, and never getting complacent, no matter how routine things might feel.
Because at the end of the day, isn't the best defense a good offense?
Absolutely, 100%. And being informed, being prepared, understanding what ADP 337 is telling us, that's a huge part of that offense.
This deep dive, it's given you a good foundation for sure, but it really is just the starting point. Go back, reread the document, think about how what you learned applies to what you do to your unit.
Exactly, because the more we all understand these principles, the better prepared we are for whatever we face out there.
It's about being more than just a soldier. It's about being a protector, a guardian, for the people around you, for the mission you're all a part of.
Yep.
Powerful stuff. All right, so as we wrap up this deep dive into ADP 337, here's something I want you to think about. The document talks about all these new threats we're facing, cyber warfare, information operations, that kind of thing. But what about other big global issues like, let's say, climate change? I mean, that could lead to shortages of vital resources, mass migrations. How are things like that going to complicate the operational environment even further?
Absolutely. How will all that change the way we think about protecting our forces, our infrastructure, everything? How can we get ahead of those ripple effects and adapt our strategies to account for them? These are the questions we've got to be asking ourselves as we're dealing with a world that's becoming more and more complex and interconnected all the time.
We've got to be thinking ahead of the curve, thinking critically, never underestimating how important it is to stay vigilant.
Can't let our guard down. It's about taking that responsibility for protection seriously, not just for the battlefields of today, but for what's coming down the line.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Until next time, everyone, stay safe out there, stay aware, and stay ready.